June 6, 1944. The fate of Europe hangs in the balance. Across the English Channel, the greatest amphibious invasion in human history is underway. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of men, the long-awaited D-Day. But what if it was all a lie? What if, at that very moment, the success of the entire Allied operation depended not on a fleet of warships, but on a single crackling radio broadcast? Not on an army of soldiers, but on the voice and nerve of one man, sitting in a darkened room hundreds of miles from the fighting. This is the story of a deception so audacious, so precise, it turned the German High Command into a puppet of its own paranoia. When the Allied vanguard was fighting for its life on the beaches of Normandy, another battle was being waged in the ether, a battle of pure illusion. When one man faked D-Day alone, this radio fooled the entire German army. Our story begins not in June, but in the spring of 1944. The location, a top-secret facility known as the Bunker at Shepperton Studios in England. Here, the Allied deception unit known as R-Force operated under the command of Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways. Their mission, under the overarching plan called Operation Fortitude, was to create a phantom army, the fictitious 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, commanded by the formidable General George S. Patton. The strategic situation was stark. The Allies needed the German 15th Army, some 150,000 veteran troops with powerful panzer divisions, to remain pinned in the Pas-de-Calais. This was the narrowest point of the English Channel, where Hitler was convinced the real invasion would land. If those forces moved to reinforce Normandy, the fragile beachheads could be crushed. But how do you make a non-existent army seem real? You build a legend. Fake tanks made of inflatable rubber were arranged in fields. Dummy landing craft crowded empty harbors. Double agents, carefully controlled by British intelligence, sent meticulously crafted lies to their German handlers. And you need radio traffic. An army communicates. It is a living, breathing entity of orders, requests, and reports. This is where our central figure enters, a man whose true identity remains, in many records, shadowed by his code name. He was a radio operator, a signals expert. For our purposes, we will call him by the name often associated with this pivotal role, Sergeant John C.R. McGuffey. His tool, a powerful mobile radio transmitter. His stage, the silent countryside of Kent, directly across from Calais. His performance, the solo orchestration of an entire army's electronic heartbeat. For weeks leading up to D-Day, McGuffey and a small, rotating team had been building the persona of FUSAG. They followed a strict, believable routine. Mornings were for low-level unit chatter, logistical requests, vehicle reports, mundane administrative traffic. The volume would build through the day, mimicking the activity of a vast force preparing for war. But the night of June 5, 1944 was different. As the real invasion fleet, over 6,900 vessels carrying nearly 160,000 men, slipped through the stormy darkness toward the coast of France, McGuffey prepared for his most critical performance. He was largely alone. The orchestra was now a solo act. At 22:30 hours, his transmitter crackled to life. The first signals went out. They were designed to be heard, and more importantly, triangulated by German listening posts along the French coast. The messages were fragments, pieces of a puzzle the enemy was desperate to solve. Call signs of fictional divisions, the 9th Infantry, the 21st Panzer, U.S. version, units that existed only on paper and in German intelligence files. Then, the weather reports, a crucial detail. He broadcast requests for conditions at fictional airfields, discussions about wind speed and cloud cover for airborne operations. All of it pointed to a force grounded, waiting for a break in the weather that was in reality battering the real invasion fleet. By midnight, the real paratroopers of the 101st and 82nd Airborne were drifting down over Normandy. The bombardment of the beaches had begun. In Berlin and at German headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, confusion reigned. Reports of parachute landings in Normandy were flooding in, but the intelligence from the Pas-de-Calais sector, influenced by years of deception and now by this lone radio signal, argued otherwise. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, was skeptical of Normandy's significance. He, and more importantly, Hitler's headquarters, the OKW, believed it was a diversion, a feint. The main blow was still expected at the Pas-de-Calais, and the radio traffic from McGuffey's transmitter with their proof. As dawn broke on June 6th, the crisis at Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword beaches reached its peak. Men were dying in the surf, pinned by merciless fire. They prayed for reinforcement, for the panzers to be slow to react. And in Kent, Sergeant McGuffey entered the most demanding phase of his operation. With the real invasion now publicly known, his script had to change. He had to simulate the controlled panic, the hurried preparation of an army that had been caught by the launch of its own diversion. The traffic became urgent, but deliberately confused. Messages were sent, then hastily canceled. There were calls for embarkation schedules to be accelerated, for unit commanders to report to phantom briefing rooms. He simulated the sound of an entire army scrambling to its departure points. To the German listeners, it was unmistakable. Fusag was now activating, preparing to cross the channel and deliver the true, decisive hammer blow. Every crackling transmission was a nail holding the German 15th Army in place. By noon on D-Day, the situation on the ground in Normandy was precarious. At Omaha Beach, casualties were catastrophic. Gaps in the Allied lines were vulnerable. A single, determined armored counterattack could have pushed the Americans back into the sea. That counterattack depended on the Panzer Reserves, primarily the 21st Panzer Division, already engaged near Caen, and the mighty 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend and the Panzer Lehr Division. Most critically, it depended on the 15th Army in the Pas-de-Calais, with its 116th Panzer Division and other mobile units. The order to release these reserves rested with Adolf Hitler himself, who was asleep at his Berchtesgaden retreat. Critical hours were lost. When he awoke and was briefed, the deception woven over months and amplified in real time by a single radio operator clouded his judgment. The German High Command was paralyzed by the ghost on the airwaves. They were looking at two maps. One, provided by frontline troops in Normandy, showed a desperate and bloody but containable landing. The other, provided by their intelligence officers who listened to McGuffey's broadcast, showed a looming, even greater cataclysm. General Alfred Jodl, Hitler's chief of operations, refused to release the Pas-de-Calais divisions. The logic of the deception was impeccable. Why would the Allies use their most famous general, Patton, in a secondary attack? Why would they have built up such a massive force in Kent if not to use it? The radio traffic confirmed their deepest fears. For Sergeant McGuffey, these hours were an exercise in nerve-shredding endurance. In his cramped radio truck or secluded bunker, surrounded by maps of fictional unit locations and code books for non-existent regiments, he was the conductor, the orchestra, and the composer. A mistake, a mistimed signal, a call sign used out of sequence could unravel the entire illusion. The weight of the lives on those Normandy beaches pressed down on him with every keystroke of his Morse key, with every spoken code phrase into his microphone. The real crisis was one of belief. Could one man, through sheer mimicry, sustain a reality powerful enough to dictate the movements of a nation's entire army? The tension was not of bullets and shells, but of psychology and perception. The fate of D-Day had shifted from the muddy fields of France to the electronic impulses emanating from a single point in England. The turning point did not come with a bang, but with a sustained, convincing silence. As D-Day, June 6th, bled into D+1 and D+2, the script evolved again. McGuffey's traffic began to reflect a new phase, the feigned postponement of the Pas-de-Calais invasion. Messages spoke of revised loading timetables, of frustration with continued poor weather over the Channel Narrows, of reconnaissance flights being canceled. The Phantom Army was portrayed as standing down, but only temporarily. The threat remained palpable, a sword dangling by a thread. This was perhaps the most brilliant psychological ploy. An attack launched and repelled is over. A threat perpetually imminent is far more powerful. It commands constant vigilance. And the German High Command bought it, completely. Ultra-intercepts, the Allied breaking of the German Enigma code, began to reveal the stunning success of the ruse. German signals spoke of the large-scale enemy concentrations in southeast and eastern England as the main enemy force. Orders continued to hold the 15th Army in place. The critical period, the first 48 hours when a rapid German counterattack could have been decisive, passed. By June 8th, the Allied beachheads had consolidated. Men, vehicles, and supplies were pouring into Normandy in an ever-strengthening stream. The Mulberry harbors were being towed into place. The bridgehead was becoming a front. Sergeant McGuffey's role now shifted to a slow wind-down. Over the next week, the radio traffic of FUSA gradually diminished, then became sporadic. The story told was one of a force being stealthily dismantled and transferred to Normandy after its purpose as a threat had been served. The ghost army faded back into the static from which it was born. The lone radio operator had done it. Through a flawless, relentless performance, he had given voice to 1 million ghosts, and in doing so had immobilized 150,000 real, deadly soldiers. The turning point of D-Day was secured not only by the courage of the men on the beaches, but by the unparalleled deception enacted from a quiet corner of England. The outcome of this electronic masquerade was written in the battlefields of France. The German 15th Army remained in the Pas-de-Calais for a crippling 7 weeks after D-Day. They waited for an invasion that never came. By the time Hitler finally realized the truth and released these forces, it was too late. The Allied breakout from Normandy, Operation Cobra, was already underway. The delayed German reinforcements were fed piecemeal into a collapsing front, unable to alter the strategic disaster. The casualties saved by this deception are incalculable. Military historians estimate that holding those divisions back likely saved tens of thousands of Allied lives and shortened the war in Europe by months. For his part in this grand illusion, Sergeant John C. R. McGuffey's specific recognition is obscured by the secretive nature of his work. He was likely commended internally within the clandestine world of our force and the London controlling section. Men like him were the unsung architects of victory, their weapons not rifles, but imagination and impeccable attention to detail. The true legacy of his actions is found in the success of Operation Fortitude, widely considered the most successful military deception in history. It stands as a testament to the power of information, of perception in modern warfare. It proved that a single, well-placed voice, armed with nothing but a radio and a formidable understanding of the enemy's mind, could be as decisive as an army corps. This was the story of the one-man invasion, a performance where the stage was the airwaves, the audience was a high command, and the stakes were the liberation of a continent. It is a reminder that history is shaped not only in the thunder of artillery, but in the silent, unseen battles of wit and will. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War.